All right, people at home, we are practicing how to name chemical compounds today, all right? This is how you're going to do it. The worksheets that we've had before today have been either using Rule 1 or Rule 2 with polyatomic ions, or they've been just for Rule 3. So I'm going to talk to everybody about how to name compounds when you have a sheet with all of them mixed up, all right? Now, up here is the periodic table, all right? And I'm going to recreate it right here. So, I'm going to do this real quick. All right. These two tall groups right here on the left, we know they're always +1 and +2. So these guys are locked in with their oxidation number, okay? If you cross the stairs from the tall group all the way over, we call that Rule 1. And Rule 1 is just add-ide. It's not really that simple, but that's what we call it, all right? And there are 4 other guys that go with Rule 1, and they're aluminum, gallium, zinc, aluminum should be up there, and silver. And they make a little Y like that on the table. And if you look up here on my table, right there, you can see them marked, right? Silver is always +1. Zinc is always +2. These two guys are always +3, all right? Okay. So that's Rule 1. Rule number 1 is just add-ide. Now, or, you just name the polyatomic ion on the end. For example, if we had sodium from over here, and then it was connected to nitrate, you're good. You just say sodium nitrate, right? All right. Rule number 2, that's when we come from the middle, and you have to use a Roman numeral. Now, the reason for rule number 2, the reason you have to use a Roman numeral is because we don't know what the oxidation numbers for any of these guys in the middle are. We don't know. So you have to use an oxidation number. For example, if it was copper and oxygen, you'll have to look at the formula and say, hey, was that copper +1 or was that copper +2? And then you write that with a Roman numeral. And then for number 3, boom, that's the easiest one. Number 3, rule number 3, that's when we have covalent bonds. And then you use the numerical prefixes, all right? So, when you have a worksheet like you will today, here's what you should do. Ready? Here, we'll say here's a 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's 4 problems, all right? And then, how about this? And then, all right. So here's what I want you to do. First thing, I want you to look at number 1, okay? And then I want you to write in a little circle beside of it, is this rule number 1, rule number 2, or rule number 3? What do you think it is? Is that rule 1, 2, or 3? Ashlyn, yeah? Yeah, that's rule number 1. Boop. Now, beside problem number 2, which rule do you think we're going to use here for for problem number 2? Is that going to be rule number 1, 2, or 3? What do you think? That's right. This is going to be rule number 2. because titanium is in the middle, and we don't know its charge, and we're crossing the stairs. So that's rule number 2. All right? What do you think number 3 is going to be? Which rule is that one going to be? That's right. That's rule number 3. Because they all come from up here. Remember, the H acts like it's sitting right over there. And then this last one, number 4, is this going to be rule number 1, 2, or 3? What do you think? Correct. This is rule number 1. Now remember, this is rule number 1, but you have a polyatomic ion, right? So it's rule number 1, though, because we're going from over here. Lithium's all the way over here. All right? So now that we know that, that's what I want you to do when you have a problem. You write down, is it rule number 1, 2, 3? Okay? So here's what we can do. I'm going to ask you people at home. Well, they can't see me. I'm going to ask you people at home, and I'm going to ask people in here. Who can name number 1 for me? What's the name of number 1? It's rule number 1, so sodium nitride, that's it. It's just sodium nitride. You know that. If you can say that it's rule number 1, and you know rule number 1 is just add "ide," all right? So if you have a little chart like this, and you write down which rule it is, you're not going to miss it, all right? Ashlyn, this is rule number 2. It's titanium and oxygen. 1 titanium and 1 oxygen. What do you think the name of the second one is? Okay, but now it's rule number 2. And rule number 2 is use a Roman numeral to tell me what the charge of that titanium was. So what do you think? Okay, let's take a look here. Titanium, it's going to be titanium something oxide, right? So how many titanium cards do we have? Let me make sure I'm still on the screen here. How many titaniums are there? 1. So I've got 1 titanium card. And how many oxygen cards? I got 1 oxygen card. You know the oxygen has what charge? That's right. So what must that one have been? Right? So what's the name of this? Yep, that's it. That's how we do it. So if you know what rule it is, then you can always work it out. All right? Let's try this one, number 3. Evan, what do you think the number 3? It's rule number 3. They all come from up here. What's the name of that? Dicarbon hexahydride. Excellent. Okay, and then we look down here, number 4. Anytime you see one that looks really long, then you know that you're going to just look up the end of it. And that's the polyatomic ion carbonate. So number 4 is just called what, everybody? It's just called lithium carbonate. All right, that's it. So that's what I want you to do every time. Every time you have every time you work on one of these problems, you're going to have a sheet, and the problems will be all mixed up. And the first thing you need to do is label that. Is this rule number 1, rule number 2, rule number 3? Now understand, you may still miss some of these rule number 2s, okay, because they're a little bit harder. But if you draw cards, if you play the card game with them, like we did on the Ed puzzle, right? If you draw cards, like I know I have 1 titanium and I have 1 oxygen, you know the oxygen, you can go backwards and figure out what the titanium was, right? That's the hardest one. These are the easiest ones. Rule number 3 are the easiest ones, right? Rule number 2 is the hardest ones, all right? All right, so that is how we do it. Peace out.